This module covers drawing in frames, if needed, adding variables to the frames, managing any formatting, and previewing each record to verify everything displays properly. When a document uses the Fusion Pro plugin to designate and export the variable frames from InDesign, those frames will be in the exact position and size from the InDesign layout, which is the case for the template we've been working on. However, to demonstrate how to use those tools, we will draw in a few frames into the PDF. All frames are drawn the same way and may be resized or repositioned after they've been added. Each frame tool has a set of crosshairs to target where the frame will be positioned. Holding the mouse button, drag the starting point corner to the opposing corner and let go. Once a frame is drawn, switch to the selection tool and grab the corner to adjust the size. Or click the center of the frame to move it. The frame will appear transparent as it's being drawn or adjusted. This allows it to be positioned over the PDF base art. More accurate adjustments may be done by using the arrow keys or using the fields for XY coordinates or the height-width values on the Properties palette. To open the Properties palette, double-click the frame or go to Fusion Pro, Palettes, Properties. The top of the Properties palette allows for each frame to be named if needed. Naming frames is critical when using rules to show, hide, or adjust frames individually. There are also utilities to lock the frame and variable content in addition to locking the properties of the frame. Continue adding all the required frames for the template being built. You'll notice that the Properties palette will change to reflect the type of frame that's been selected. All frame types, except text on a curve, also allow for rotation, text wrap, and rounding of the frame's corners, which will only work when the frame uses stroke and/or fill. The colors available at this point will be the same colors that were on the InDesign swatch palette. However, Fusion Pro does allow for additional colors to be added via the Fusion Pro menu, Advanced, Colors. Once all the frames have been added, use Acrobat's editing tools to remove the content in the base art that is replaced by the added variable frames. Refer to Acrobat's help for more guidance on editing the PDF. Continuing on with the template we've been building in this video series, only text and graphic frames will be used in this document. Look to the user guide for more information on chart frames and text on a curve. To select and adjust any frame, use either Acrobat's Hand tool or Fusion Pro's Selection tool. When active, the frame will display a dashed red line around the edges. However, to make this a more visual experience, let's turn on the preview so that we can see the variables as they're added. Click Step 5 on the Steps palette to open the Preview selector. At the bottom center of the palette, check the box for the preview. This may take a few seconds to activate the first time. For the moment, I only want to turn on the preview. We will take a closer look at this palette later in the video. Specific to graphic frames is a drop-down at the top to identify the field or rule to display in the frame. In the previous video, we created one graphic rule called Back Image Rule. Graphic frames will only show graphic variables, which is the only variable in the drop-down to select. Along the bottom of the graphic frame's property palette are settings to define the alignment of the image. Vertically, there is top, center, and bottom. Horizontally is left, center, and right. Below that are scaling options for the image in relation to the frame. To demonstrate better, let's look at settings in a sample with the preview active. The default for a frame is Best Fit, which relies on alignment yet scales the image proportionally to fit within the frame boundaries. None relies on the alignment but does not scale the image at all. So you can see how much larger this image is than the frame. The scissors button controls the clipping of the frame. which allows the image to extend beyond the frame boundaries. Fill will stretch or squish the image to fill the entire frame. Fit to shortest edge relies on alignment and scales the image proportionally until the shortest dimension of the image reaches the shortest edge of the frame. Proportional fill also relies on alignment, scaling the image proportionally until the entire frame is filled. The scissors button will show how much of the image appears outside of the frame if needed. At the bottom of the palette is the shape option, where the circle rounds the image display to the midpoints of the frame. This option is the only one that allows for feathering, which adds a bit of transparency around the edges. The shape option allows for a shape to be drawn in the frame to create a clipping path to show the image. Switching back to the mailer, let's move on to the text frames, which are all that remain. Select the lone text frame on the front, which will switch the palette from graphic to text. Let's review the unique settings specific to the text frame properties palette. To insert variables into a frame, click the Edit button near the top, which will open the variable text editor. Here is where all the text content in a frame is managed. Notice that the text area is white. The text is also white. So in order to see the content, Fusion Pro allows for grayscale to help display the text. Along the top of the menu, fields to manage the font formatting with font face, size, style, and color, all of which would have carried over from the InDesign document. On the second line is the variable dropdown showing all the fields and rules defined for the template. There's a list of known variables to Fusion Pro. They all begin with the dollar symbol and can be used just like any of the variables that we defined in the data definition. Before anything is inserted, select the word, phrase, or paragraph to be replaced by the variable in the text area. Then return to the dropdown, select the appropriate variable, and click the Insert button. Chevrons will display on either side of the variable. For this frame, first name is the only variable. Also on that line are options to manage tabs, adjust horizontal alignment, and paragraph settings. For now, click OK to close out the variable text editor. Notice the red line indicating the text is overflowing the frame. At the very bottom of the Properties palette, there is a button to address text overflow. More than likely, the space after the paragraph is creating an issue for the Fusion Pro frame, but was not an issue for the InDesign frame. By default, the radio button to cut text off is selected. There is also an option to have text overflow to a new page, which is a very specialized option. But what we want is to adjust text to fit, which scales down by percentage to the minimum point size needed for all the content to fit in the frame. It also has an option to expand to fill if needed. The red line should disappear as the text now fits. Switching to the back of the mailer, let's explore the rest of the Properties palette. Above the Overflow button is a series of entry fields for the frame's text inset, which adjusts the distance text displays from the sides and top and bottom of the frame. In addition, there is an option to add columns into a frame with a control for the gutter between the columns. On the very bottom are advanced text effects, providing settings for drop shadow, adding stroke, embossing, or to run text vertically. And lastly, the vertical alignment of the text in the frame, top, center, and bottom. Let's finish adding all the variables. Double-click the addressee frame to open the variable text editor. This frame has numerous variable fields. Select the text in the text area and insert them individually. For the second address line, we will select it and adjust the paragraph settings to suppress the line if there is no value. Click Paragraph to open its menu. Here, most of the standard formatting options are available, but down near the bottom is a drop-down to suppress if. We will use Suppress if empty. The value for if containing empty variable will be used in another frame. Click OK to close the paragraph menu, and then OK to return to the template. In the last frame, double-click to open the text editor. When text is rather small, there is a zoom percentage which adjusts the display but keeps the font at its original size. Insert the variables as needed. For the phone numbers and email, we will be inserting the rules for formatting those values in the data. Make sure to leave the titles for the phone numbers. After adding the variables, select both of the phone number paragraphs and click the paragraph button. This is where we can utilize the suppress if containing empty variable option, where we want to suppress the titles if there's no phone number value, and both of these are in the same paragraph. Click OK, then click OK again to return to the template. Now that all the variables have been inserted, let's see the results for the other records in the data. If the preview selector is not open, click Step 5 on the Steps palette to reopen it. The preview should already be active if you've been following along. If not, check the box at the bottom center to turn the preview on. You can see the actual values in the data source, but then you can see what the rules have returned. Using the arrows, you can move from record to record. Jump to the first or last record, enter a specific record number, or select a field in the data and choose the longest or shortest value it contains. The preview selector allows you to verify rules are working and the content is displaying as it should. Continue previewing records as needed to verify everything looks good. If there are any problems with the display, go back and make the appropriate adjustments. At this point, if you haven't already, make sure you save the template. That concludes this video on drawing frames, adding variables, adjusting frame properties, and previewing the values. Next, we'll look at composing the output. Thanks for watching.